Their first vote of the day at noon on an amendment offered by Nebraska Democrat Ben Nelson, which would prohibit the distribution of images from airport security machines. The Senate will be in recess from 12:30 to 2:15 to allow members to attend their weekly party lunches. Live coverage of the Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Unto you, O Lord, do we lift our hearts this day in praise and thanksgiving. You are our God, and we put our trust in you. Lead us away from shame, for you are our rock and refuge. Today, give your grace and strength to our lawmakers. Empower them to live worthy of every trust this nation commits to their hands. Make them champions of liberty, messengers of peace, and servants of your kingdom. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., February 15, 2011. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Jeanne Shaheen, a senator from the state of New Hampshire, to perform the duties of the chair. Son Daniel K. Inouye, President Pro Tempore.
Madam President.
The Majority Leader.
Following any leader remarks, there will be a period of morning business until 11 a.m. this morning. Senators are permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each during that period of time. At 11, the Senate will resume consideration of the FAA authorization bill. At 11:40, the Senate will resume consideration of the Nelson of Nebraska amendment. There will be up to 20 minutes for debate equally divided prior to a vote in relation to the amendment as amended. The Nelson amendment relates to criminal penalties for the unauthorized distribution of advanced imaging technology. At about noon, the Senate will proceed to vote in relation to the Nelson amendment as amended. The Senate will then recess from 12:30 to 2:15 for our weekly caucus meetings. After caucus, there will be 10 minutes for debate equally divided prior to a vote in relation to the Wicker Amendment. The Wicker Amendment relates to the collective bargaining rights of TSA employees. Senators should expect the vote in relation to the Wicker Amendment to begin about 2:30, 2:25. Both these amendments are subject to 60-vote thresholds. Additional roll call votes in relation to FAA amendments are expected to occur throughout the day. H.R. 359 is at the desk and due for second reading, I'm told.
The clerk will read the bill for the second time.
H.R. 359, an act to reduce federal spending and the deficit by terminating taxpayer financing of presidential election campaigns and party conventions.
I would object to any further proceedings at this time, Madam President.
Objection having been heard, the bill will be placed on the calendar under Rule 14.
Madam President, I'm going to take a few minutes today to talk about a friend of Nevada and a friend of mine. This man is from the other side of the world. His name is Manny Pacquiao. He's here in Washington today. Every time I visit with him, I come away more impressed than the last time. Though those of us who serve here are close with our colleagues in the United States Congress, and some even achieve celebrity status inside the Beltway itself, the so-called Beltway bubble, few of our names and faces are recognizable beyond our shores. Senator Ted Kennedy was an exception to that rule, with fame he earned through the decades he and his family dedicated to public service. So was Senator Clinton, and in her current role as Secretary of State, even more than the world recognizes and respects her. I traveled to Europe with Senator John Glenn. He was really a rock star all over Europe. He was a global hero because he orbited the globe. But no one in our national legislature comes close to the level of worldwide fame of the congressman from the southern tip of the Philippines, Manny Pacquiao. The bond between the Philippines and the United States is deep and strong. During World War II, when the Pacific nation was a commonwealth of this country, brave and patriotic Filipino troops served under the American flag. With the leadership of Senator Dan Inouye, who acted so heroically in the Second World War, he fought here in the legislative branches of our government to give those troops, those Filipino troops, the well-deserved and long overdue pensions they earned during a time of war. Now, Congressman Pacquiao is a member of Congress from the Philippines. He's also a boxer who holds many other titles than that of congressman. He holds the title of super welterweight champion. He's the only person in the history of boxing to hold 8 world titles. He's the first person in history to win 10 world titles in 8 different weight divisions. He started out being a champion at 106 pounds. He's fought them all, Madam President. He's fought them, people outweighing 35 or 40 pounds. He has been declared the fighter of the decade, 3-time fighter of the year. He's rated the #1 pound for pound best boxer in the world. He has been from flyweight to light middleweight champion, welterweight champion, lightweight champion. No boxer in history has achieved what he has achieved. He's an ambitious young man with a closet full of championship belts and the start of a promising political career already under his belt. I'm most gratified, as I mentioned, that he's a friend of Nevada's, where his sport is a major player in our economic arena. He's someone I really admire. Manny Pacquiao and I have come from opposite sides of the globe, but in our hearts we really come from the same place. Manny grew up with nothing. He was just a kid when he had to leave his home and live in the streets. He started fighting in the streets and went into the ring, where he certainly has been one of the all-time greats. He fought for money when he was a mere boy. He has done so well in life. He's fought to get an education that he wasn't able to get as a young boy. He's married to a wonderful woman named Jinky. They have 4 children. He's a devout Roman Catholic. When he stepped into the ring for the first time, it really changed his life. He's a fighter. I've talked about that. There's near unanimous agreement that he's the best pound-per-pound fighter on the planet today, and perhaps ever. And that takes into consideration some great fighters. Sugar Ray Leonard, Sugar Ray Robinson. He's a man who is so fun to watch. His last fight, I watched that fight. He was outweighed by some 30 pounds. He won the fight. He won every round of that fight. And the man he fought had been a champion. But he knows it's not enough just to fight for yourself, and he does that very well, or to be a world champion many times over. You have to be a champion for others. That's what he believes. He's very tough, we know that. Not because he can take punches as forcefully as he gives one, but because he fights for those who can't fight for themselves. The large and vibrant Filipino community in Nevada looks up to Manny, as do Filipinos and fight fans all over the world. He sets a welcome example of an athlete who does good for many. He's someone who isn't in public service for fame or glory or money, but because he knows his people need his advice, need his voice. He's a friend, I repeat, of Nevada's, a friend of America, and I'm happy to say a friend of mine. Madam President, when President Obama released his budget yesterday, he made one thing very clear. Getting our economy back above water will require shared sacrifice. Few documents are more intricate and complex than our national budget. But beyond the numbers, what I found deep in this budget is an affirmation of our principles. Among those values is our commitment to recognize and adapt to reality, investing in what works and changing what doesn't. I appreciate the President's call for shared sacrifice and living within our means, and more than that, his willingness to do more than just talk, but actually lead toward fiscal responsibility. He didn't just talk about tough choices, he made them. I don't agree with all of his choices. I disagree with some of his cuts, but I cannot deny that by making the difficult decisions, he showed leadership. I also found in the President's budget the recognition that we're not in competition to determine who can cut the most. Rather, we need to cooperate to discover where we can cut the smartest. This budget proposes a long-term plan to responsibly cut the deficit in half in President Obama's first term. It doesn't do that by blindly chopping zeros off bottom lines or eliminating programs wholesale. It invests in the things that grow our economy, things like education, things like innovation, and things like infrastructure. And it doesn't buy into the partisan talking point that there's no difference between spending and investing, because there is. In other words, it recognizes that you can lower the deficit, not just by subtraction, but also by addition. When we invest in education, we create a smarter and stronger workforce. When we invest in innovation, we create jobs before the rest of the world beats us to those jobs. When we invest in our infrastructure, from the interstates to the internet, we lay the foundation for prosperity. I'm disappointed that the congressional Republicans seem to have learned nothing from recent history. They're again trying to slash the programs that keep us safe and eliminate the programs that keep us competitive. They're still fighting for billions in special breaks for oil and gas companies, the insurance industry, and billionaires. Madam President, in the last few days, the former president of Chevron Oil said we don't need those subsidies. But yet Republicans are fighting for subsidies for oil companies when the oil company executives say they don't need them. We've already tried it their way. They're fighting and substantiating billions in special breaks for oil and gas companies, insurance industry, and billionaires. We tried it. It doesn't work. That's why we're in the mess we're in. But the Republican reaction to the President's budget has been an attempt to go back in time. If they really want to time travel in search of fiscal responsibility, they shouldn't stop at President Bush's failed administration. They should keep going to his predecessors when we balance the budget with President Clinton. We live in the present, and we budget for the future. We have spending challenges before us. We can't afford to forget those challenges won't be solved by extreme rhetoric or unrealistic idealism. They'll be solved only when reasonable partners are willing to come to negotiate with responsible proposals that find a critically important balance, one that brings down our deficit while keeping our economy moving in the right direction. When we find that middle ground, we'll leave the next generation with an economy they can count on, with the confidence we seek in our future, and with the knowledge that when difficult decisions need to be made, Americans don't shirk that responsibility. When presented with a tough choice, we make it. Madam President, I would ask unanimous consent that my statement regarding Congressman, the champion Manny Pacquiao, and my speech on the President's budget be separated.
Without objection. Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 11 a.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees.
Madam President.
The Senator from Illinois.
Madam President, the President presented to Congress a budget. It's the annual process or ritual where the President makes the first move, presenting a budget, and then Congress responds. The House and the Senate come up with a budget resolution within the confines of the President's spending and decide how to spend the money. We're now at that phase. But I want to say a word about what the President suggested and what we're hearing from across the rotunda from the House Republicans. The President understands that we have two challenges as a nation. The first is to create more jobs because we have too many people out of work. And secondly, we need to reduce our deficit. It seems that they're cross purposes, but they don't have to be. The President is trying to chart a course that moves us forward in a responsible way, cutting spending where it will not hurt economic recovery and growth. Investing with the federal funds we will spend in programs that count. He's talked about an agenda for more education, more innovation, more infrastructure and economic growth. That, I think, is the appropriate balance. But if you look at what the Republicans have done in the House of Representatives, they have ignored that balance. They believe that just cutting spending by itself, without concern about the impact, is the best thing for America's future. But it really defies our common human experience. If you said to a family just starting out, it's going to be tough economic times ahead, there's some things you will have to do without, but is there one thing that you want to make certain that you invest in? Most families would say, well, we want to get the kids educated. We want to make sure that our children go to school because that's their only chance. If they don't get a good education, their lives are not going to be as full. They won't make as great a contribution. The same thing's true at the national level. What the President has suggested is we need sound investment in education. Unfortunately, the House Republicans, in their approach, cut some of the most basic programs when it comes to education. The President understands, and I think all of us appreciate, the United States has slipped from first to number 6 in the world in the percentage of high school graduates going to college. How can we be more competitive in this century? How can we expect to attract good businesses here and the right kind of inventors and innovators that will really spark growth in our economy if we don't have more of our students attending and graduating from college? Madam President, we've also slipped from first to 12th in the percentage of people holding college degrees. America better wake up and look around the world. I recently spoke at a commencement for a law school in Chicago, and I was surprised when it came to the master's degrees in law. Those are advanced degrees. Anyone with that degree has been in school at least 20 years of their life. And when I looked at the graduates in the city of Chicago from a law school there with master's degrees, more than half of them were women from China. I thought to myself, I never would have dreamed this. In my time, and this goes back quite a few years, there weren't that many women in law school. Now they make the majority of law students. But who would have guessed that Chinese women would have the majority of graduate degrees from a law school in Chicago? Wake up, America. That's what's happening. The Chinese, India, and other countries are focused on really promoting education for those with the skills to lead their countries in the future. Can we do anything less? Our nation's strength lies in its ability to outcompete and innovate every other country in the world. We can't do it if we're not preparing the next generation of scientists, entrepreneurs, and innovators. Let's take a look at what the House did, the House Republicans. They are promising that we can cut off investments in education even as quickly as this remainder of this fiscal year and still prosper. I question that. They released their continuing resolution for the fiscal year on Friday night. Their proposal cuts $4.9 billion in education programs, from pre-kindergarten through college, the money that helps schools teach and helps students get to college. Here's what they cut. $1.1 billion from Head Start, a program that helps low-income, disadvantaged kids enter kindergarten ready to learn. Madam President, you've seen these Head Start programs, and I have too. And you think to yourself, where would these kids be without it? Many of them come from single-parent families, and many of their parents are struggling, making basic minimum wage and hardly any more, and this is where they send their kids during the day so the kids at an early age, 3, 4, and 5 years old, are exposed to socialization, getting to know other children, have mentors and teachers in the room, and learn the basics. And then when the day comes when they're ready to go to kindergarten, they are truly prepared and ready to go. The House Republican cut in Head Start would drop 127,000 low-income preschoolers from the program, over 5,000 in Illinois. That means cutting the rolls by 20% and laying off 55,000 teachers and staff. So is that where we start to build for the future? Taking these children out of the Head Start classrooms, laying off 55,000 teachers? What does that say about the future of those children? Will it be as good or worse? I think we know the answer to that. $700 million under the House Republican proposal would be cut from the schools serving more than 1 million disadvantaged students. We understand, because we're testing, that kids who go to school, who happen to be from many times lower income families, disadvantaged families, don't do as well. We know it. We see it in the test scores. We try to put money into the districts. For what purpose? Reduce the size of the class, provide extra help, mentoring and teaching after school, and give these students who would otherwise fall behind and might drop out a chance to succeed. Well, the Republicans say there's an area to cut. They take $700 million out and end up firing 10,000 teachers in these programs, over 280 of those from schools in my state. Innovative programs that are working today to move our states toward reform and education would be seriously cut. Race to the Top gave to our Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, incentives of millions of dollars to offer to states if they will do things that are bold, innovative, and successful in improving education. It's interesting that the first two states that were awarded, if I'm not mistaken, were Delaware and Tennessee. It's pretty clear that the Department of Education wasn't looking for any political agenda here. They were looking for states truly committed to reform. I'm sorry that Illinois didn't make the cut. You would have thought the President's state might have had an advantage. We didn't make it. And in fairness, there are things we could have done that would have improved our chances. But other states changed the laws, moved forward to try to make sure there is accountability in education as well as good results. What do the House Republicans think about that? Well, they think that we should cut that, dramatically cut that program. And they would cut Pell Grants by $845 per student. What does that mean? I know that the senator now presiding over the Senate, like myself, has met many of the students receiving Pell Grants. A lot of these kids come from families where no one has ever gone on to college. Many of them come from low-income families that can't give them any financial support. And many of them struggle to try to stay in school and still take a job and earn enough money to get by. The Pell Grant helps them. The Pell Grant says if you are from a low-income family, we're going to give you a helping hand. Now, to say that we're going to cut that grant means that many of these students won't be able to continue in school. They'll quit. Some may return at a later time. Many won't. We will have wasted an opportunity for young, ambitious students who use the Pell Grants and student loans to really have an education that can lead somewhere. Madam President, I might say, in fairness, that I know a little bit about this subject because I went to college and law school borrowing money from the federal government. Had I not been able to do that, I'm not sure I'd be standing here today. It gave me my chance. I still had to go to classes and take the test and earn the grades and eventually pass the bar exam. But the fact is, that money made all the difference in the world to me. There was no way that my widowed mother was ever going to pay for my education in those days. She just couldn't do it. And that was my story. Now repeat that story millions of times across America and ask yourselves, what are the House Republicans thinking? They're going to cut Pell Grants for these students who are struggling to go through college? What would we do? Why would we do that when 80% of our nation's fastest growing jobs require higher education? In Illinois, an estimated 61,000 students are going to see their Pell Grants significantly reduced or eliminated. The House Republicans also want to eliminate $1.5 billion to grants to states for job training. When you think about the number of unemployed in America today and how few of them will be able to return to the same job they left, you understand, as I do, that they need new skills, new training. They've got to move into new areas of opportunity. Job training offers that. The Republicans eliminate it. Now take a look at what the President does. The President makes a dramatic cut in spending, freezing our spending, reducing our spending over $400 billion over the next 5 years, and bringing domestic discretionary spending in America as a percentage of our gross domestic product down to a level lower than it was in the 1950s under President Eisenhower. So he calls for sacrifice, as we should. But the President understands the importance of education. His budget includes $8.1 billion for Head Start to serve nearly 1 million children and families. It includes $1.3 billion to support almost 2 million children and families through the Child Care Development Block Grant Program. The President's budget also includes $26.8 billion, an increase of about 7% for elementary and secondary education, focused on raising standards, encouraging innovation, and rewarding success. Madam President, last week, the heads of many school districts in Illinois came to see me. They're struggling. You can understand why. With real estate prices going down and values going down, property tax receipts are not what they used to be. Our state's in bankruptcy. It doesn't have the money to send back to school districts. The small amount, about 5% that comes from the federal government, is important to them. And if the House Republicans have their way, that amount will be reduced. The President tries to maintain that contribution from the federal level to help local school districts. There's something else the President does which I think is essential to better education. He invests $185 million for a new Presidential Teaching Fellows program, which would provide scholarships to talented, aspiring teachers who commit to teaching for 3 years in a high-need school. It also invests $80 million to promote improved teacher training in the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and math. I think most would agree that the success of an education depends first, in my case and many others, in strong family support and encouragement, but also in the quality of the teacher in the classroom. We want to make sure we have the best teachers so that we have the best students, the best graduates, and we are in the best position to compete in the years ahead. The President's budget also maintains a maximum Pell Grant of $5,550 per year, ensuring nearly $8 million across the country, 8 million students, across the country can continue to pursue a college degree. There's also money in the President's budget for worker training, which we desperately need. Also an investment of $1.4 billion in competitive programs to bring about reform in education, the Early Learning Challenge Fund, spurring states to improve quality, the new Race to the Top, bringing resources to school districts willing to make reforms, and a new First in the World competition, which encourages colleges and universities to demonstrate success in graduating more high-need students and preparing them for employment. There are skeptics, Madam President, who believe that no matter what the government does, that is not going to create jobs or create opportunity in America. I think we can go too far in selling the government's role, and we shouldn't. But we can understand in education that the government's role does make a difference. I try to calculate in my mind. It's been barely 50 or 54 years since we made a decision in Congress that we were going to invest in student loans to help young people go to college, same program that helped me go to college. It happened after Sputnik was launched, and we were concerned about the Russian effort to put satellites into outer space, followed by missiles, followed by Cold War face-offs that we might experience. And so we said we need more engineers and scientists and more college grads. We made the investment, and it worked. We not only made it to the moon, but we moved the American economy forward to lead the world in the last half of the 20th century. It was no accident. Part of it was the investment of our government in education for our citizens. The President believes we've got to keep that commitment. I agree with him. I think the House Republicans have gone too far in their cuts. I think they start with the skepticism that government can do anything right. Many of them were the beneficiaries of student loans, college student loans, through the government, and they've forgotten that. They shouldn't. Families across America count on it, and we should too. We've got to make sure that we have a strong budget that cuts deficits, and I agree that we must, but maintains essential economic investments. Congress needs to enact a plan that will lead to fiscal sustainability over the long term if we want to ensure a strong economic future. The President has provided us an excellent starting point in that conversation. Madam President, I yield the floor. Before I yield the floor, I ask unanimous consent the time consumed in any quorum call during the period of morning business be charged equally to both sides.
Without objection.
I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President.
The Senator from Georgia.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today in the United States Senate and on the floor of the Senate to speak for a few minutes about a gentleman whose 70th birthday will be celebrated next Monday night in Atlanta, Georgia. A gentleman who has deep ties to the United States Senate. His name is T. Rogers Wade. He came to the Senate in 1973 as an administrative assistant and later chief of staff to Georgia Senator Herman Talmadge. During those years, Senator Talmadge was chairman of the powerful Agricultural Committee, which, to my state of Georgia, is instrumental. Rogers Wade is one of those unique people that all of us, like the chair and myself, are lucky to have in our offices. Somebody that supports us, keeps us moving in the right direction, helps us back home with our people. In other words, kind of drives our ship of state. My chief of staff does. Rogers Wade did it for Herman Talmadge. But he took those talents and brought them back to Georgia after 1980 to do a number of memorable and tremendous things. For example, he first came back and founded a firm called Eddington Wade & Associates, a public affairs firm that represented many Fortune 500 companies throughout the state of Georgia and their locations. Following that, he did many other things in Georgia. He founded Leadership Georgia, a program today celebrating over 40 years in our state, generating new leaders for our state, a great program. He came to the Fannin Institute of Leadership at the University of Georgia and serves on its board, serves on the board of the Richard Russell Foundation. But most importantly, he's a can-do guy who became president of something known as the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, an organization that is nonpartisan and dedicates itself to opine on legislation going through the Georgia legislature or initiatives coming before the people on the ballot, to give them an unvarnished, non-political, straight-talk expression of what that law or what that issue would be. It's become one of the most respected foundations in our state and, in fact, around the country. He served as president of that foundation from 1997 to 2009, and today is a trustee of the foundation. One of the interesting things T. Rogers Wade did is, a lot of people talk about what they want to do to reform education and help kids in need. T. Rogers Wade did it. He founded something called Tech High in Atlanta, Georgia, a school in an old dilapidated building that he raised the money to rehabilitate, brought in excellent faculty in the STEMs, math and science, and opened it as a charter school approved by the state of Georgia for the most in need freedom-reduced lunch kids in the metropolitan city of Atlanta public school system. And he began attracting those kids to that charter school. So successful has Tech High been that Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education, chose it to be one of his first visits after he became Secretary of Education under President Obama. And it still is a guiding light today of what can be done with a focus on excellence and helping kids in need to brighten their future. Just recently, with the election of Nathan Deal as the new governor of Georgia, he picked one person out of our state to guide him in his transition team, and it was T. Rogers Wade. Rogers Wade has touched the lives of American servicemen by being on the board of the USO, Georgia businesses by being on the board of the Chamber of Commerce, and citizens around our state by being the president of the Public Policy Foundation. Next Monday night, I'm going to have dinner with a great Georgian and a great American. And I rise at this moment on the floor of the United States Senate to pay tribute and honor T. Rogers Wade on the occasion of his 70th birthday. And I yield back the balance of my time and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.
Well, the Senate gavelled in about 40 minutes ago, and they're in the midst of morning business. They'll do that for another 20 minutes. Around 11 o'clock, the Senate's expected to resume work on FAA reauthorization. Coming up at noon, the Senate's expected to vote on the Nelson Amendment. That's regarding the distribution of FAA screening X-rays. At 12:30, they'll recess for their weekly party lunches. That'll last until about 2:15. And then at 2:25, they're expected to vote on the Second Amendment, the Wicker Amendment, regarding the TSA collective bargaining. Live coverage of the Senate, of course, right here on C-SPAN 2. The House gavelled in at 10 this morning. They are beginning with morning hour speeches. Legislative business will get underway at noon. Members beginning work on federal funding for the rest of this fiscal year. There will be an hour of general debate and further debate only on amendments related to federal spending. This debate could consume the rest of the week in the House. Also this morning, President Obama will be holding his first solo news conference of the year. That's starting at 11, and he'll be likely asked about his budget yesterday, which was released, $3.7 trillion submitted yesterday morning. Also the possibility of a government shutdown and the stepping down of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, all potential questions for the president when he holds his news conference. And you can see that live starting at 11 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN. FAA programs are on the Senate's agenda today with at least 2 votes on amendments scheduled. Work is expected to begin in about 10 minutes. At 12:30, the Senate will break for their weekly party lunches and return at 2:15. You can see live coverage, of course, of all of that here on C-SPAN 2. President Obama will be holding his first news conference of the year. Live coverage on C-SPAN set to start at 11 Eastern. Right now, the House is in session. We suspect that they will be out and will be able to bring you live coverage of the President again on C-SPAN. And on C-SPAN 3 right now, White House Budget Director Jacob Lew is testifying about the President's $3.7 trillion budget. released yesterday includes a 5-year freeze on federal spending, and it claims $1.1 trillion in spending cuts. Well, House Budget Committee Chair Paul Ryan is holding that hearing right now, and this morning he told ABC's Good Morning America that the president has punted on confronting the deficit. You can see that live right now on C-SPAN 3.
Madam President.
Senator from Montana.
Madam President, I ask that further proceedings of the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, I realize we're in morning business, but I'd like to make a short statement and ask for consent to do so.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise to oppose the McCain Amendment to essential, I rise to oppose the McCain Amendment. His amendment will eliminate Essential Air Service program. That amendment will probably come up when we get to the FAA bill later this morning. I applaud my colleague for exploring ways to address our deficit, and I want to join him in looking for opportunities to control spending, but this is one program we must preserve. We won't improve the deficit by stifling local economies. The Department of Transportation estimates that 1.1 million travelers from more than 150 communities rely on Essential Air Service program. The Essential Air Service program is a promise to rural America, which absolutely needs airports for economic development, as noted in a 2009 Journal of Rural Studies report entitled "The Economic Importance of Air Travel in High-Amenity Rural Areas." End quote. Nearly half of the American West consists of publicly owned lands containing mountain ranges, forests, rivers, lakes, parks, and areas for wilderness, wildlife, and grazing. Many people from around the country come, especially from the east, to visit the West, especially in the summer, to go fly fishing, camping, tourism, in the winter, skiing. People enjoy public lands in the West. We have so many public lands in the West, Madam President, we don't have private land for development. This means we have tremendous distances between population centers, and we need reliable air travel to ensure jobs, private enterprise, and access to medical assistance. Montana is primarily a rural state. We rank 47th in population. That is, only 3 states are less populous than we, while being the 4th largest in landmass. To put it differently, although we are slightly larger than the country of Japan, we have fewer citizens than the state of Rhode Island, the smallest state in the nation. Montana has 8 Essential Air Service communities: Sydney, Glendive, Wolf Point, Miles City, Glasgow, Havre, and West Yellowstone. The first 7 rely on industries such as agricultural and mineral extraction, industries that are vital to American growth, industries which exist in rural America rather than in downtown metropolitan areas. A couple of those airports also lie near Indian reservations where economic needs are paramount. Without Essential Air Service, all these areas risk isolation. In 2008, Montana's Essential Air Service provider went out of business. We lost air travel for months. I want to read a passage from a recent Great Falls Tribune article to illustrate the impact on jobs and the economy. And it says, quote, "When Havre, a city of 10,000 people, lost its air service, BNSF Railway closed its local office and moved the operation to Billings." Think of that. Think of the irony. The railroad needs reliable air services. Didn't have them, so had to move to another location. It shows how interconnected our economy is. I want to take this opportunity also to announce that I have launched a Senate Essential Air Service caucus. Senator Collins from Maine is co-chairman of the bipartisan caucus. Several other Democratic Republican senators have joined us, and I encourage my other colleagues to join and stand with us. It is important to rein in the deficit. That is clear. But let's be responsible about how we do it. Pulling the rug out from under programs like Essential Air Service will shrink the economy back on communities that rely on this program as a lifeline. Madam President, I yield the floor. Is it just the absence of a quorum?
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.